Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to teach you a very important skill that you will need across every chess game that you play from this point forward. You've needed it already, but now you will realize its importance, and that is how to evaluate a chess game and a chess position. There are 12 key talking points in this video, so let's get started. Talking point number one actually doesn't require a chessboard. It requires you to just stop and actually look at the position and take in a few points. Number one, what type of position are you playing? Are you playing a tactical position? Are you playing a very positional game? Whose turn is it? That is also important. Are you calculating on your turn, or are you thinking while your opponent is busy calculating? And these are just things where you need to stop and be present in the game. A lot of us, particularly in fast time controls, it's don't think. Everything is on intuition. Everything is on just go, go, go. In longer games, in rapid games, and even at critical points in blitz games, it is important to just pause for a moment and to think about the position. I cannot express how important this is. Are there immediate threats? What has changed from the previous move? Don't rush. Strong players take a moment to read the position before calculating. Now, the first real criteria that we need to discuss in terms of a chess position and analyzing a chess position is king safety. Now, this is a game from the South African Open that I played. It was a Caracan defense, and we don't have to talk about the intricacies, but there is a moment here where we need to have this conversation. And that is because at a particular point, my opponent has castled. What does that mean? His king is safe. I have not done so yet. I continue to play good moves, but actually here, for a moment, there was a sacrifice. But what you'll see is we get into a game where I have not castled. And what happens is my king becomes very vulnerable, and I have to give up my queen. This all happens, and now I'm unable to castle. Now, looking at the evaluation, we'll talk about material imbalance. Now, I'm up 2 points of material. I have got knight, bishop, and rook for a queen. That is winning. That is winning. It doesn't matter that he's got more pawns. I'm completely winning. But what you need to evaluate here before we turn the engine on is look at a few things. So he's up on material, and we'll talk about its importance later. But my king is not safe. He is in the center of the board. There are no real ways for me to attack his king at the moment. So he's worried about my king and about cracking open my position. That's what I need to be cognizant of. So what do I do here? They go here, and I go here. Check. Picks up the bishop. I drop that, and I lose the bishop. What did I just say I need to be cognizant of? This rook move. All it does is attack the queen. My king is not safe. So in a game, I should have considered the fact that my king is not safe. This is why it's so important, because it leads you to moves like this, which are just a fork of the king and the bishop. And so this is something you need to be cognizant of. I can't express how important it is. That's why I'm starting with it, because it is such an important concept that you need to be aware of, because in games you need to understand when you can attack the king, if the king is vulnerable, and how to properly analyze a position. Sometimes you might be up a lot of material, you might have more pieces, your pieces might be more active, but if the king is weak, that is all that is going to matter in the end. And so point number 3 is material balance. Now, the material are all the pieces that you have available, and they're all worth different points. We'll talk about their relative and their fixed value. Now, this was a game I played before I'd even had a YouTube channel, before I was taking chess seriously. This was just a game at school against another school. I was playing Ember Fouchinier, and it was an Italian game. It was a boring Italian for a large portion, until a particular point where I got to this position where I won a bishop. Now, if you look down here, it says I'm up 4 points of material. Why? Because I'm up not only a bishop, but also a pawn. And what that means, it makes all the calculations when you're up considerably easier. You know that I'm better. If we turn on the evaluation, I'm going to be about +4. And in fact, I'm +5 because the position is so good, because my pieces are active as well. And we'll talk about piece activity in a moment. But that +4 advantage plus a little bit extra is what gives me my +5 advantage. It's the material that I'm up. If I put her pieces back on the board, I might only be +1 because I've got that slight advantage. But I'm now just better. And it comes down to material. And why material is important is you can do what I did in this game, where you can trade off. And because you're up, you're always going to be up that material. And material, at the end of the day, is what wins you chess games. Being up a rook, or a couple of pawns and stuff like that, you just need to be up a pawn at the end of the day to win a game. Potentially, you just need that. So as I go on, the knight is what makes the difference, because in a rook endgame, unless I won the couple of rooks, it would have not been as winning. But I used the material to win a couple of extra pawns. Now she's only got 3, and I've still got the knight. I traded everything off, so the knight is there. That's the +3. That's the piece that I earned earlier. And then I used that material advantage to dominate the position. Because at the end of the day, you've got more pieces. So generally speaking, you're going to win the trades. You're going to be able to win more material because they simply run out of defenders. So all the way back here, when we were talking about that +4 advantage, why it was so important, for me, I was thinking practically about the fact that, queen trades and rook trades and trading the knights, I'm going to be left with a bishop. And a bishop is enough material for me to have a decisive advantage. Now, sometimes you can be at a material disadvantage, but the king's safety that we spoke about is not as good. But here my king is perfectly safe, and he's never at risk. So we're all fine there. He was at risk at a couple of points, but I had enough material, I had enough wits about me to protect him. The rook came down and I just slid away. No back rank, my knight was safe, and everything was fine. So that's point 3, material balance. Easiest thing to check. Who's up? Do both sides have the same pieces or the same number of pieces? Do they have the same number of pawns? Like if you're evaluating this position, it's +7. That's my material. I'm up 7 points of material. That is the evaluation that I have here. And with that said, let's go on to point number 4. Now, point number 4, we're going to use a game that I lost. This was at my first ever chess tournament over the board, in terms of being a rated tournament. I've got the black pieces here. I've just brought my rook to the center, and you can see with the engine, it says that I'm worse. It says that white is up +1.9. Now, what are we looking at? The kings are both quite safe. White is up 1 point. So where does that extra 0.9 come from? It comes from the fact that not only is their position a lot better, their pieces are going to be more active. This knight will be able to get out, and the rook is staring and helping this pawn. This pawn has got a clear plan to go forward, and as we see the game develops, he's able to, stop me from causing problems. He develops his knight, and now you can see the advantage is still strong. And even though he can bring his king, his pieces are what we call more active, because they're doing much more stuff. My rook is staring at this, and this is well protected and doing nothing. My knight is staring at this, which is protected. It might be able to sneak in here, maybe, if I trade the rooks and force that rook to blink away. But again, I don't want to trade, because his rook then is going to be staring on an open file. I'd rather keep the tension. And now, so he's able to bring his king. My king can kind of run forward a little bit, but he's going to run out the way. This king has got an easy path straight to the center of the board, providing my knight gets out the way. So he just continues to dominate. He eventually trades, but he's able to push the pawn. And then here, it's +2. But he's not up +2 points of material. It is because he can go check. He can win the knight, but he can also push. He elects to just close everything down to not allow me to create any sort of activity and counterplay. The knight gets out the way. Now, by the way, this just completely hangs the game. We've spoken about it before, because I can trade and push. That's where your calculation comes in. So takes, and push. and his activity wins him the game because this pawn was a threat from the very beginning. He always had a rook behind it. His knight was in the game controlling key squares. And just a couple moves ago, the material was almost equal. One pawn sometimes is not enough to make the difference. I know I spoke about that's all you need sometimes, but if it's like an A pawn or something, it can be defended. But this is one marching down the center of the board. He's got his knight on a good square. He's brought his king towards the center, and I've just got no moves. That's the real problem. I've got no moves to make my position better, and his activity and his development wins him this game. Now, it's a very obscure concept. I understand that. But piece activity just means, is the piece very good? My knight, for example, you could say, well, it's well advanced. Yeah, but it's not doing anything. It's not active. It can't go to anywhere useful. It can't cause any useful threats. In fact, it's got to be defended. His knight can go there at various points, can reroute and come back here. His rook is controlling a good file, protecting this pawn. My rook now is, well, active, controlling the open file. But there's no weaknesses unless he wants to go here. But because I've allowed that one point of material to dominate everything, I'm buggered. And so we move on to now topic number 5. Alright, the next talking point is pawn structure and pawn weaknesses. Now this is sometimes a very vague topic, but I can give you here an example, again from one of my games. Most of these will be from my games unless I can't find a relevant example. But this one is my first ever game that I played over the board. It was from that first tournament. And here what I've done is I've played the move e5. Now as white, the first thing you calculate is, can I do nothing? No, because this is a fork. So you would have to bring the bishop back. But what this move does that I didn't understand at the time, and I didn't properly evaluate, is that it makes this a weakness, and it makes this a weakness. And what I've already done with the move a5 earlier is I've actually weakened both of these because none of them are connected. They're not well defended. And these are things you've got to look at. So what he does is he takes. Now I thought, oh, this is easy. This knight's pinned. He can't take. But what he does is he goes back. Now this is a problem because that I'm just losing the pawn. So I have to trade. Takes, and then here. And he takes, and he sees this, and he's got eyes on this. Now I play a very bad move here. Rook a d8 is fine, but he's able to go here. And the problem is, all 3 and 4 of these are weak. His 2 pawns support each other very nicely, and all 4 of mine are weak, apart from the 2 next to the king. And he's got a very nice solid clump here. So I play a move like queen f7, but he's able to go here. And while I'm defending this, he's going after that. Now I can play b6, and for a moment, it looks like I've got strength, but he takes this. I lose the pawn. And what happens is he wins it, and after this trade, all he has to do is be up a pawn. And you can see he's got that +1, +1.3 advantage. What I've managed to do is get my rook out, so it's at least active. But his rook is very active. That is still weak. That might be able to be defended. So he brings his king. I give a check. I go here, check, and he brings the rook back. And the problem is, I can't trade into this endgame because I'm going to lose the king and pawn endgame. So this is all the layers of how you evaluate the position, all the way back when I play this terrible pawn move that is e5. As white, you sit there and you evaluate. Before you begin calculating, you're like, wait, hang on. That's weak, that's weak, that's weak, that's weak. These are tangible pawn weaknesses, so my position must be better. You might not know that it's +1 and that it's going to be so much better, but you must know that that is a weakness and a mistake. Now, some of these are very, very high level. Sometimes the opponent might just hang a pawn. But these are good concepts that you can all incorporate into evaluation. And the reason this is worse is because when this gets taken, more often than not, it comes with check. If it's by the bishop or by the queen, taking the pawn. It comes with check. Because by playing f5 earlier, I'd weakened my king on this diagonal. His king's perfectly safe. His pieces have got control of the center. His rook's on an open file. I've got this bishop applying a little bit of pressure. My rook can come to the open file, my rook's on the f file. So in terms of activity, not too bad. Material balance is equal after all of these trades, but he's better. And that is now because of the pawn weaknesses that I have created for myself. Now, admittedly, this next concept is quite difficult to understand. Again, we're in one of my over-the-board games. This is a game where I had a fantastic positional advantage, and that is because of the concept that we're exploring now, which is space. Now, it is very difficult at chess it's very difficult when you're playing chess sometimes to understand the difference between space and overextending. I have more space. Why? Because I've got these three beautiful pawns in the center of the board that are taking away key squares and are well advanced. Like this is a clean pass pawn if I can push it through. Now what is important here is to not overextend, which we will see in just a moment. Now I have the option here, because he's played f5, to take en passant. But that is not a good move because I lose the space advantage. Watch what happens if I take en passant. I'm plus 1.3, the advantage disappears because I'm giving up that space. So the move that I play, knight f3, is a little bit better. Why? Because I'm increasing the activity of the knight and I'm maintaining all of this. Now he's got fighting for a little bit of advantage here. These two pawns are doing a good job clamping down on this square. But that's about it. He doesn't quite have as much space. Now, space refers to the squares that you control. So look at the plan he develops. While I go off on my own little tangent, he fights back. He's now striking back at my center. He's pushing for space, and he's fighting back. Now, what I do here is very bad. I move my king out the way. I let him get here. Now, look at this. Look how he's wedged all of this in. Now, he's getting a lot of space on the queen side. I've got the central space, which is always just slightly better because it makes it hard to move your pieces across. But then I overextend. G4 is a bad move. Firstly, because it hangs this. But secondly, because this is not well supported. And even though I'm trying to push through all of, F5 and the lot, I'm not able to sustain it. And his pieces will come alive and fight me there. I needed to be more patient and to maintain this good stronghold and to allow him this and to fight back against it. It's a very difficult concept to explain, but hopefully you will be able to find resources in what I'm saying and some usefulness. Okay, this is the final topic that we're going to be needing the board for. It's point 7, and now we're putting everything together. So what we're doing is we're looking for what we call candidate moves. Now, these are moves that you need to calculate and that are worth your consideration. And we'll explain more in depth about how you find them. But as you can see here, I'm slightly better. And white plays this move, which is a bad move. And now it's time for me to think of a move forward. Now, what we need to consider. White has more space. They've got this very good structure. They've got a well-advanced pawn. Now, what we can do, a plan that we can make to gain space, is to potentially play the move c5. C5 to c4. Why? Our knight defends it, and we can jump the knight in here, which could be beneficial. Not at the moment, because the queen and the bishop defend. It also would allow us to get our queen onto this diagonal, which attacks the king. King is very weak on that dark square diagonal. What we can also do, a move worth considering, is the move f5. Because we're striking at this structure. We're striking back, we're fighting against his space advantage. A move like bishop here giving a check, while appealing, just loses a pawn for the moment, because knight takes and then queen takes. Now, these are all things you need to consider on the board. If we want to gain more space, we can play a move like b5. b5 and then c4 looks good and gets us a lot of space. We can also just play the move knight to c4, threatening a fork, threatening the pawn, and could potentially rotate backwards and put our knight very nicely in the center. We can also play a move like rook fe8, developing our rook and giving it something to look at, making it more active. Now, Why am I speaking about these moves specifically? Why aren't I just saying play king h8? I'm looking at what white has and what they might want to do. So they have a space advantage. Okay? I have two bishops. Bishops like the board open. So moves like f5 and b5 and opening the position up are very appealing. He has one bishop, so he would like the position to stay closed and to try and do this battle with his two knights. And finally, king safety. I want to open everything up. Even though this move kind of weakens my king, this pawn is blockaded. It's blocking anything on this diagonal. I can swing my bishop this way. I can swing my queen this way. So we're fighting back against what he has as an advantage. His weakness is this pawn. It can't be defended by another pawn. It has to be defended by pieces. So moves like this, which come with check, could potentially win it or put pressure on it. So in the game, I played f5. Now, the engine doesn't bless it, but that is a reasonable move from reasonable considerations. He brings the queen over. Why? Because his idea might be to take, or he's reinforcing this and potentially wanting to push this forward. Now, here again, we got to think through our thought process. The queen was there, is now there. It's no longer defending the square. So now that old plan that we had of playing c4, that comes in very highly because now we can put the knight there. And it's on a good outpost square well into enemy territory. And so while he swings the rook over, now we can play a waiting move. We can play rook a, e8. Why? Because we want this rook to be on the f-file, because at any point we might take or they might take. So it's going to be nice and open. This rook on a8 is not doing anything, and we're expecting that these two files are going to open up. You might say, wait, why didn't you finish the plan? Because that move still exists. There's nothing they can do to stop it. They can't push the pawn forward. And if and when they do, my knight can jump in here, or we can defend the knight, and so on and so forth. So he goes out this way, and now the plan changes. Why? Because the positions change. The knight used to be there, so we could never really play f4. Now we can. We can play f4 because it attacks the knight. It makes it go backwards, and then we can switch the plan and build up nicely on the king side. And that is how you think through your candidate moves. Now, I'm not always perfect at this. This probably wasn't a perfect explanation. But look at what your opponent has, what you're trying to stop, and what you have that you're trying to maximize, that you're trying to make it as best as it can be. That is probably the thought process that I can give you into how you find moves that you should be looking at. Try and find moves that are always doing something to improve your position or to stop your opponent's threats. Okay, so we're going to talk through the remaining few points without a chessboard. Now, I know that might be a bit worrying, but these are just some pointers now for when you're evaluating a position and when you're calculating a position. Now, my advice, and this is point 8, when it comes to calculation, is to do short, clear lines. Don't try to calculate a 15-move sequence that relies on exact play and stuff. Calculate something short. Calculate forcing lines. Checks, captures, attacks. Look at those and do short examples. Three to 4 moves. Don't try to go 5 moves, 6 moves, because unless you're a grandmaster, you don't know what your opponent's going to do. So all that time you're using might just go to waste. Point 9 is strategic plans for both sides. Analysis isn't just about the next move, and this is part of your evaluation, and we'll summarize it at the end. But analysis and evaluation is about what you each want to do in the future. Yes, it is about the context of the current position, and the evaluation in terms of the engine changes move by move. But the way you evaluate a position is you're not going to sit there, this is +1, make a move. This is now +0.9, make a move. I think this is +1.1. You're going to evaluate it in general terms and say, this is better for white for these reasons. Now, the reason might be king safety. You might be at material. Your pieces might be more active, or your pieces might have better future prospects and give you concrete plans and play. So the key questions you want to ask are, what is my plan and what is my opponent's plan? And either can I stop their plan, or am I going to execute my plan faster? You've got to always analyze from both perspectives. It is very difficult because a lot of us are very selfish. We're like, I'm going to get him and there's nothing he can do. And then he does something and you're like, damn. And then you lose the game. Point number 10 are practical considerations. Real chess is not played by engines. Engines have their own chess that they play against each other. You've got to think, and when you're evaluating a position and you're thinking about a position, think about the time on the clock. Look at the time. How much time am I willing to spend for the next 2 to 3 moves? Are you exerting psychological pressure? Maybe your opponent has played a gambit, or you want to act like a Chad and you're going to play a super tricky gambit. Is there a bit of a psychological thing? Maybe you're playing a kid, or you are a kid playing an adult. Is there that psychological pressure? And then you've also got to choose whether you want something to be complex or to be simple. Do you want to make the position super, super tactical and you've got to think through all these considerations? Or do you want it to be a very simple position? Something like an end game, a middle game / end game without queens on the board, where there's no real tactics and it's very positional. Evaluating and thinking about a chess position, you've got to think of practical considerations. Grandmasters are always thinking about what's most practical. Talking point 11 now is common mistakes in position analysis. What we always do when we look at a position, we look at how we can checkmate in 3 moves. You and I do it all the time. It's like, well, if that moves over there and I move that over there, I can mate him on the next move. Absolutely great. What are you doing? You're ignoring your opponent's threats. Sometimes you overvalue material. We've spoken about how it's important, but sometimes you might be up 2 points of material because you've got a bishop for a rook. If everything was off the board, bishop versus rook is a draw. So you've got to understand the appropriate value of material. I know that's a very complex topic, but you've got to understand that just because you're up material, is it going to guarantee you the win? Are you going to use it in a beneficial manner to get you a win? Otherwise, you might actually just get a draw. So the simple analysis checklist: king safety, material, piece activity, future prospects, opponent's ideas, candidate moves. Something like that. That's what you got to think about. You've got to run through this checklist. Obviously, when you begin calculating, checks captures attacks. When you're looking at, am I better in this position, am I worse? King safety, material, piece activity, future prospects, weaknesses. I hope you found this video useful. I think the camera's gone completely bananas, but let me know what you think of it in the comments down below.